Hi, I'm Steve O'Halloran of AssetLabs. This video is chapter 1 of many that will take you through the operations of the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Tool, otherwise known as MAP. What is MAP? Well, MAP is an inventory technology tool created by Microsoft to collect enough device and user information to figure out if you could migrate over to newer Microsoft technologies, such as the upcoming version of SQL Server or Azure or Office 365. That said, that same data can be used to collect enough device and user data to review your license compliance position. And that's probably why you're here. So over the years, Microsoft has expanded their SAM operations to involve third-party telesam and selected Microsoft SAM Gold partners to assist companies in a free SAM review. Their primary data collection tool is MAP. Likewise, customers of AssetLabs and our SAM partners also use MAP to assist in internal non-disclosed SAM reviews. And no, AssetLabs does not participate with Microsoft for their reviews. So that said, if you're looking for an independent assessment of your Microsoft position, or if you're seeking advice on how to approach a funded Microsoft SAM review, we'll have links at the end of this video for free trials and access to our in-house licensing veterans in order to reach out. So what makes this MAP tool so popular for both AssetLabs and other entities helping with SAM reviews? Well, it's free. And it collects almost all the data required for a complete Microsoft portfolio assessment for both data centers and desktops. It comes with its own SQL Server Express Edition, so installation is a breeze. And since it uses agentless collection technologies, it can be installed on a laptop and run in minutes and collect all the information, all the users, all the devices in your network environment in a matter of minutes or hours with very, very little setup time. Keep this in mind. MAP collects a lot of data. And if you're in the midst of a funded or forced SAM assessment with Microsoft, then you and your executive officers and possibly even your legal counsel should be reviewing what data you're about to release. In our opinion, some of what MAP collects is outside the scope of what Microsoft needs to determine license compliance. So in this video, we'll be going over the inventory scenarios as listed in MAP, and we'll start the MAP interface, and we'll be describing what is being collected and why. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start up MAP, Microsoft Assessment and Planning Tool. I already have it installed. I've already done something with some data just as a demonstration at 26% inventory success, and that's kind of typical, and we'll talk about that in another video. So when you first start, you will see a bunch of scenarios. If on the overview, you can see the scenarios that are available, as in like, hey, what will it take me to get to cloud? How's my desktop doing? What if I can virtualize my desktops? Let's do my usage tracking. You'll notice, though, that there is no scenario for licensing or SAM. And so let's dispel a few sort of misnomers. First of all, the application is delivered to you by Microsoft. It's free. The data in itself does not go to Microsoft at all unless you deliver it in a certain way through a Microsoft back file or through other processes. So, but on its own, it does not an ET phone home. The data does not go to Microsoft. So let's get that straight. The second thing here is that this is not a SAM tool, right? This is a inventory tool. It will not streamline, normalize, categorize your software titles. It will not understand what is auditable versus what is not. It will not allow you to put in your licensing information. It will not figure out what entitlements that you have, what usage rates you have. It will not calculate whether or not you are compliant with Microsoft Visio or Microsoft SQL Server. Nothing of that nature. Therefore, there is no SAM nor licensing tab here, and rightly so. But on any of the tabs, when it's time for you to collect the information, you hit on collect inventory data. One more thing before we go that. This is installed on a desktop. I'm running it on my desktop, and you can too. There's also some misnomers that you think you have to run Microsoft MAP within a virtual state. You don't have to. And in fact, we suggest that you don't. I know that Microsoft offers, like VM machines. Sometimes they're limited to 1 gigabyte, and that's sort of a problem because the underlying SQL Server is also limited to 1 gigabyte. So put it on a real machine, please. And you can stick it on a desktop or a laptop. It's quite benign, and you can uninstall it when you're done. And honestly, it uses a SQL Server DB instance. And what that means is that when MAP is shut down, when you shut down MAP, SQL Server itself, all of the hidden components and running processes also shut down. So unlike if you've ever experienced installing SQL Server from the SQL Server Management Studio, you get all these processes in the background. This does not happen with MAP. So it's quite benign. You can uninstall it when you're done. Though, if your company has 20, 30, 40, 50,000 devices, at the end of the day, you will not probably want to use Microsoft Map when it comes to desktops, but probably will want to use it tactically in what we call sniper mode for servers. And we'll get to that in a later inventory as well. But for everybody else who doesn't have 30, 40, 50,000 devices, and the reason being, that's pretty well close to the 1 gigabyte limit that SQL Server Express has. And though Map can do it, the SQL Server won't. So, and more importantly, you probably want to use a collection of tools. Again, we'll talk about that later. So here's Map, collecting the inventory data. You click on this, and regardless of what scenario you go through, this is the classic inventory and assessment wizard. Now, for this video, we'll be talking about the inventory scenarios, which is probably not a good term. These are not inventory scenarios. These are inventorying devices or inventorying methodologies, quite honestly, or technologies. But they seem to have used the word method over here. These are discovery methods. And we'll be talking about this in the next video. But right now, we're going to go quickly through the inventory scenarios and explain what you should be selecting and why, and maybe what you should be skipping. And so let's go through them right now. So let's take a look at the inventory scenarios. Here they are. There's quite a lot of them, and we'll go through them very, very quickly here. Just keep this in mind that when you choose these things, you can choose them one at a time or several at a time. You don't have to select them all at the time. Map is a lot like an elevator. It can take you places, but not if you press all the buttons in one shot. So we suggest sparingly choosing the scenario based upon the technology that's relevant for you. And it's probably not in your best effort to just select them all and see what happens, because you go out and buy some lunch, come back, do a puzzle, and it still won't be done. Let's take a look at this. As far as the interface is concerned, whenever you choose a scenario, such as Windows computers, it will tell you, of course, the description and the collector technologies required. A little bit of a glitch here, but when you select another scenario, the description is selected, but the collector technologies are aggregated, they're collected. So as you start collecting them, they'll start to add up. It's not that VMware computers needs SSH, VMware, and WMI, right? And if you click on this, and it's not that active devices users requires VMware technologies. It's just adding them up. So don't get confused by that, but keep that in mind. The collector technologies require credentials, and the credentials are declared in the next series of videos under credentials and credentials order. So just keep that in mind, that that this is a collection of collector technologies based upon the collection of your scenarios, and not for any particular one. Okay, so Windows computers. This is the core. This is where any Windows device, whether it's a desktop, a server, a Surface tablet, whatever it be, if it's got a Microsoft Windows operating system on it and it's contained within your networked environment, this is what you need. So this is for both desktops, servers, Surface tablets, whatever it may be. Select that and away you go. And what it will do is it will collect all the hardware and the software and some attributes of the hardware as well, right down to the CPU string. As far as the software is concerned, it primarily focuses on what we used to call the add remove applications. So as an example, it will identify that you have Microsoft Office 2012 standard, assuming that you do, but it will not discriminate whether or not you have from that install also included PowerPoint or decided not to include it. So the individual executables found on your drive are irrelevant. That's not where it's looking. It's WMI is Windows Management Instrumentation, and it's actually looking in the registry, and it's looking into the same place in the registry where you try to add and remove your application. So it's basically a list of what has been installed. more or less. So that's what it's looking for. And so it will find that Office is installed, but it will not recognize whether or not you have, let's say, PowerPoint installed. And that actually has no issue for licensing, and that's why it works that way. Linux and Unix computers. Well, to date, we haven't found anybody yet that absolutely requires this from a Microsoft perspective, maybe one day. But as it stands right now, chances are you do not have to inventory your Linux and Unix computers and, okay, Mac, right? But chances are you probably don't even have any. So you can more or less, statistically, you could probably skip this one. This is one of the most confusing ones. VMware computers. Most people think that this is for the virtual machines that are being hosted by the VMware devices. It is not, right? Those machines, those Windows servers that are virtualized or Windows desktops that are virtualized will be found using the Windows computers. The VMware computers are actually your ESXi hosts. Whether it's ESXi 5, 5.5, 6, right? It will not do Citrix, right? And it won't do Hyper-V, but your Windows computers will. But this is to collect not only the hardware attributes, how many cores and how many procs are on that particular piece of hardware, but it will also collect the parent-to-child relationship, the host to the VM relationship. Interestingly enough, one of the most important things for licensing is to recognize whether a host is part of a cluster. And if so, as part of a cluster, VMs can move around, and that has a huge requirement from a licensing perspective on software assurance. Yet MAP does not collect the cluster information. Keep that in mind. And we'll show you later on some tricks and tips on a free utility that will actually do what they forgot to put into Microsoft MAP. Active devices and users. It will go into your Active Directory and pick up what it considers to be active, but chances are it is not. So it actually collects a lot of information, including users that may actually not be users, right? Sometimes people use AD user definitions for internal resources such as rooms or devices. And if you're not on top of AD, then it's going to be difficult. But anyways, it will collect that information and store it. Next, to a series of back office applications from Microsoft, Exchange Server, Link Server, Endpoint Protection Server, and I'm going to skip the SWID for a minute and get to SQL Server. Most of these back office applications will be sitting on probably a Windows server and possibly even virtual. Why they are being uniquely targeted is because most of them have additions that cannot be found by the Windows computers method of WMI. This is not a fault of WMI. It's not a fault of any inventory technology, but it is everybody's problem. It's the fault of Microsoft. So as an example, if you installed SQL Server Express 2012 on your laptop, as if you're about to do an inventory using Microsoft MAP, if you take a look at the inventory or the applications installed, the only thing you'll see is Microsoft SQL Server 2012. It will not say Express. And you won't know if it's Express or Standard or Enterprise. And the starting price for Enterprise is minimum 4 cores, $8,000 per core, $32,000, price of a midlife crisis vehicle, and Express is free. But you won't be able to figure that out. The same thing is true more or less with Exchange, Link Server, and Endpoint Protection Server. So what Microsoft has done is they've created a few more little widgets and gadgets back in MAP that says, aha, I see that SQL Server is installed. Now I'm going to ask something unique of it. But in order to do that, they had to create a new inventory scenario. So select SQL Server, right? Because you're going to need to get the additions. If you don't select SQL Server, you will not get the additions. And this is probably from a SAM licensing perspective, one of the most critical things you should do. So all of those will be selected per se. Now, I skipped something. SWID tags, software ID tags. SWID tags are an XML piece of data found on your hard drive and is extended information of an application that has been installed. This is an upcoming standard that has not yet been universally executed by all of the vendors. Microsoft is starting. Adobe has a head start on them. But at the end of the day, these SWID tags will only exist for applications from a certain date, such as those from 2016. So will your Microsoft Office 2010 have them? No. Will your Visio 2007 have them? No. So anything that you have installed a few years ago, which is pretty well everything, will not have SWID tags. Full disclosure here, AssetLabs myself is on the working group and a voting member of the ISO 19770 working group for ISO SWID tags. And so though it's close to our hearts, it is absolutely not used today in any applicable way for licensing. We've done hundreds of audits and reviews, and we've actually never had to use the SWID tags. So if you're curious, you can select it. That being said, not critical, you could pass it right over. SQL Server and SQL Server database details. So we've talked about what SQL Server does, and you click on that and you get the addition. What's this extra one? Well, SQL Server with database details collects a lot more information about your SQL Server. And this one, you're going to have to think about this one. What it does is that it also identifies the instances or the databases that SQL Server install is hosting. And you can have more than one database running on a SQL Server installation. They're called DB instances. And SQL Server with database details will pick up the name of the DB instance, its file size, its user activity, its frequency log, and some other attributes that Microsoft is interested in for at least two reasons. The first reason from a licensing perspective, and that is to help identify from a CAL perspective whether or not a lot of people are, or a lot of users or devices are accessing that database instance, because you can license SQL Server in an instance plus CAL or procs or cores, right? And so based upon how you have already applied your licensing, you may not be compliant if you have 500 people accessing it from a user perspective, but have only bought 20 user CALs or universal CALs, right? So it sort of depends, but that's what it's collecting. The other reason, so there's three. The other reason is what's called multiplexing, is to identify possibly whether or not a third-party vendor's application the database is actually being hosted by SQL Server, but the database is actually in operation from a third-party vendor's application. And 500 of your people are accessing that third-party application, and that third-party application then is looking as if it's one user, but it's actually 500 from their interface. That's called multiplexing, and that's been in the news lately. And Microsoft does not support multiplexing in that context. And so they're looking for telltale indicators of whether or not you're including a third-party application for multiplexing. The third one is from an Azure perspective. These database instances, the file size, the frequency of use are good parameters to indicate or help identify whether or not your database instances are better off over in Azure or not, or what would be the cost of Azure from a DTU perspective, distributed transaction unit, right? This has nothing to do with licensing or SAM. It's to help you migrate over to a different type of technology and basically provision your databases over into an Azure environment rather than internalize. So think carefully on SQL Server database details. Okay, we're nearing the end here. Let's slide down. Similar to the database instances, you do have Windows Azure platform migration, but that's a Windows Azure. If you're interested in moving over and creating virtual desktops, virtual machines onto the Azure system, then you want to select that. If you're not, don't select it, right? The Oracle method. Now, this is a scenario to help determine what it would take to move your Oracle investments over into Microsoft technologies. Again, if you're doing SAM, this is non sequitur. Do not select it. You don't need it. Windows volume licensing. For small companies, you may want to select this. This is actually some little extra information in order to figure out the proper OEM status of your operating system that came with your machine. So if you bought a machine from Dell outright, you bought it from Dell.com and it came to you, if you went to Best Buy or Future Shop or something like that, every computer has an OEM Microsoft operating system on it, and there's nothing wrong with that, though it does limit you. And thus, chances are, as a larger size corporation, you probably have some sort of enterprise agreement in instituting Microsoft Windows in which you're going to overwrite that operating system with a newer one or one with greater capacity so that you can do internal local networking, better security and whatnot. If you're a smaller company, you might not be doing that. You may just be using off-the-shelf OEM licensing. And if you are, select that. If you are a larger company and you know that you're re-imaging, once those boxes go into your building, you probably don't need to do this. Microsoft recognizes that you're a volume license customer and you've got the rights to re-image anyways. But if you don't have a volume license agreement with Microsoft for at least your Windows operating system, you may want to select that so you can get the proper OEM information. Okay, the last one's client access tracking for this, that, and everything else. So in 2012, Microsoft incorporated a new technology called UAL, Universal Access Licensing, and they've put it into their back office products, remote desktop services, SharePoint, SQL Server, Windows Server, and so on. It's on by default when you install it. And like those attributes that we talked about for the database instances, it will basically track and access your users, who logged into what, when, why, and all of that kind of information, right? And all of that is retained. And most of that information will then be made available in some context when you select this. Now, the problem here is that most server admins, we have found, when they understand the UAL, tend to turn it off. Because though it's nice to have, it's not a need to have, and it does have a performance effect on their servers. And sometimes they just don't want that. So they'll turn it off. So if UAL, if their client access tracking technology has been turned off during the install or afterwise, then even if you do select this, nothing will come of it. So this is used with respect to recognizing basically, do I have remote RDS CALs, remote desktop CALs? That information will be used as part of a recognition that, okay, you've got 50 users, so says the client access tracking, and you've only bought 40, so you owe 10, right? That's what Microsoft will use it for. It's not the only way that it's determined. And in some cases, based upon your licensing, you don't even have to worry about it. So if you're doing a funded SAM review, talk to your SAM administrator or your SAM partner to figure out if your licensing actually makes this non sequitur, and then talk to your technology people to see if it's actually on it in the first place, should you need it. So wrapping up this video, we're just touching inventory scenarios for Microsoft Map. You can select the various attributes. You can do them all in one shot, but we actually suggest that you don't. Only select the ones that you need and then move on from there. And we're going to move on by talking about the discovery methods in the next video. Hope to see you there. Oh, and at the same time, we'll put some links somewhere on the screen here if you're looking to get some more information from us or to try a trial of the AssetLabs web-based SAM services. Follow the links. And then after that, also, we'll have a link to the next video also somewhere on the screen. Cheers.